Alright, in this lesson we're actually going to be looking at the second part of electromagnets. We're going to be investigating how you can change the strength of an electromagnet. So in your table of contents, make sure that you leave room for the analysis and conclusions of building the electromagnet, but this time we're actually going to work on changing the strength of the electromagnet. So get that into your table of contents, as well as updating the first page of this new investigation. But make sure you leave an empty blank page for the analysis and conclusions of building that electromagnet. Now, when we look at changing the strength of a magnet, you are going to be looking at this focus question, and the focus question is as follows. How does the number of winds around the core affect the strength of an electromagnet, if it does at all? Now, one of the things that we're going to look at in this lesson is we're going to take a look at how the windings of the coil is going to affect the lesson, or is going to affect the strength of the electromagnet. So I'm going to have you stop the video in just a second and give the students an opportunity to talk within their groups about how they might find out if the number of winds will affect the strength of the electromagnet. So in other words, once you get your materials, how do you think you might be able to test this? Because the question is, does the number of winds affect the strength of the electromagnet? So go ahead and pause the video, and I'm going to give the students about 3 to 4 minutes to answer this question. All right, so hopefully you've given the students a chance to kind of talk about this, about how they might do this. At this point, it probably makes sense for them to make some notes in their notebook about how they might do this. So if this was my notebook, I would come and start taking some notes on what the plan is. So what is our plan? Our test plan. You might have some steps. So first, I might say I'm going to wind 10 times. Number 2, then I might wind 15 times. And I'll put around 4. Every group can have their own idea. Doesn't matter, because at this point what you're investigating is how you're going to do this. So go ahead and come up with a plan. Spend some time thinking about how you're going to do this. How would you test it if it makes a difference? So if you do 10 winds versus 15 winds versus 30 winds versus 100 winds, how would you know if it actually makes a difference? So in your groups, come up with a plan, but then also come up with the part of the plan that would test. So you might come to your plan and you might say, our test. How are you going to test it? In other words, what are you going to do to find out if it makes a difference? Okay, this is going to be your ideas that you're going to come up with, and take some time, talk about it as a group, spend about 4 to 5 minutes talking about this, and then come back to the video. So I'm going to pause. I'm going to mute the video for a little bit, which is your cue to pause and then come back to continue the conversation. All right, so hopefully you've had an opportunity to talk about this and you came up with the plan that you're going to do. So now what we're going to now do is pass out the science materials and let all the groups get started on building electromagnets and using what they came up with. Okay, so start building electromagnets, use your plan that you came up with, and then test it based on how you decided to test this. Now hopefully as you talked about this, you used your washers as your test. And you might have said, well, we'll do 10 winds and see how many washers it picks up. Then we'll do 20 winds and see how many washers it picks up then. And 30 winds and 40 winds and so on and so forth. And so if you were to pick up more washers with more winds, then what that tells you is that the number of winds does make it stronger. Okay, so go ahead and get started testing your steps and see what you can come up with at this point. Okay, so spend about 5 to 10 minutes looking at your ideas, and then we're going to come together and actually do one as a group. So spend the next 5 minutes testing your ideas. Alright, so now that you've spent some time testing your ideas, hopefully you started to see some differences in your results. What we're going to do on our end here now is we're going to do a study with very specific number of winds. Okay, so very similar to what we did with the electromagnet, with the magnets and the spacers between them. We're going to collect some data, we're going to graph the data, and then we're going to make a prediction on the number of winds we're going to make a prediction on the number of washers that you think a specific number of winds is going to make. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to come in and we're going to create a table. So in your notebook, go ahead and create a table. Okay, this table is going to represent the number of winds that we're going to do. Okay, so in my table, I'm going to come in and I'm going to create a T-chart. This T-chart is going to represent winds of the coil and washers. I'm going to have you go ahead and start off with a very simple number of 10 winds. So I'm going to say, you know what, start off with 10 winds. Wrap it around the core 10 times, and then tell me how many washers you were able to pick up. Then wrap it around 20 times. Tell me how many washers you were able to pick up then. Okay? As we did with the magnets, when you get to 30 winds, I want you to skip that. You will not test 30 winds. But I do want you to test 40. So I want you to tell me how many washers you picked up with 20 winds, with 10 winds, and with 40 winds. Once you have that data, okay, I want all the class to share their data. So every group is going to share their data so that we can get some classroom averages. Okay? So, take some time, experiment, do 10 winds, 20 winds, and 40 winds, and see what you come up with. Okay? I'm going to go ahead and mute the video so that you can do that. Once everyone in your group is done, you can come back and we'll share the results. Alright, so now that everyone has their data, we're now going to go around and as a group we're going to collect this data so that we can get an average. The average is going to really help us out to make a better determination as to what kind of data we're going to be looking at. So, in order to do that, we're going to take our data, this is my data, and what we're going to do now is we're going to collect the class data. So we're going to create a different type of chart. Okay, this time, what we're going to do is we're going to have the group here. So in our classroom we have 7 groups. So we're going to say group 1, group 2, group 3, group 4, group 5, group 6, and group 7. Then we're going to have 10 winds. We're going to have 20 winds. We're going to have 30 winds. And 40 winds. Now, in just a minute, go ahead and go through every group in your science class and ask how many washers they were able to pick up for each number of winds. So, for example, in my classroom, I will ask group 1, how many washers did you pick up with 10 winds? That group might say, we picked up 3. Group 2, how many washers did you pick up with 10 winds? They say, we picked up 5. Group 3, we picked up 3. Group 4, we picked up 2. Group 5 picked up 3 washers. Group 6 picked up 4. And Group 7 might have picked up 3. So now what I'm going to do is, after I've done all this, I'm going to take the average of all that data. And if you remember, the average equals the sum of all data divided by total pieces of data. So in this case, how do I calculate my average? I would take 3 plus 5 plus 3 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 3. And so if I add all these up, I'm going to get 7, 10, 12, 20, and 23. I get a total of 23. Now, there's 23. There was 7 groups, so my average is going to be 23 divided by 7. And when I take 23 divided by 7, I'm going to get a decimal. That is 3 with a remainder of 2. So I'm going to skip the remainder, and I'm just going to say 3. So that's my average. My average is 3. Do the same for 20 wines. You're not going to have any data for 30 wines because you skipped it, but you are going to have data for 40 wines. So go through this process, calculate your average, your class averages for 10 wines, 20 wines, and 40 wines. I'm going to pause the video. I'm going to mute the video so you have a chance to do that now. Come back when the entire classroom has done that. Alright, so hopefully now you had an opportunity to go through and collect the data for everyone. What you are now going to do is you're going to take that data and you're going to plot it on a graph. You're going to take this graph and you're going to plot your data. So if you take a look at this graph, down at the bottom it gives you the total number of wines, and on the left side you have the total number of washers that were lifted. So we're going to plot our data. So if I go back to my graph and I look that for 10 wines my average was 3. So I'm going to come down here, I'm going to find 10 wines, and I'm going to go to 3. However, it's important to note that this is not based on 1. This is not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because you will notice this is actually 10, which means each line represents 2. So this is 2, 4, 6, 8, then 10. So if I want 3, 3 will actually be 2 right here. This next line is 4, so that means 3 has to be somewhere in the middle, right here. This would be 3. Then you're going to go and collect your data for 20 wines. You're going to plot your average for 20. Let's say that the average for 20 was 12 wines, or 12 washers. So you come up to 12 and you plot the 12. You're going to plot your data for 40, and let's say that for 40 it was 30. So you come up 40 and 40 was 30. So here's my data. What you will now do is like you did with your magnets. You're going to connect the dots. So obviously with 0 wines I would have picked up 0 washers. So I'm going to start at 0, connect it to my first point. Then I'm going to go from there to my next point. From there to my last point. What you will now do is look at your graph and see where 30 lies. 30 is on this line, right here. You will see that 30 crosses the graph at this point. Come across and see what that is. What number is that? Okay, that number is here. That number would represent 21. Therefore, your prediction for 30 wines would be 31. So you would say my prediction for 30 wines is 21. Now, does that mean it's going to be exactly 21? Not necessarily, but it should be close to 21. Now, why would it not be exact? Okay. The reason it's not exact is because we have a classroom average for everybody. So your numbers might be a little bit different. Okay, so you're going to take your classroom average and you're going to make a prediction, and everyone is now going to test their 30. Everyone is going to come back and test 30 wines and see what that did. Okay, once everyone has tested 30 wines, you should have got a number around 21. At the very end, I want everyone to come back up here and collect the data for 30 wines. So you might discover that group 1 says, okay, we got, when we're done, group 1 might come back and say, okay, we got 22. Group 2 says we got 24. Group 3 says we got 19. Group 4 says we got 21. Group 5, we got 24. Group 6, 23. Group 7 says we got 20. Take the average, add all of these up, and divide it by 7, and see if your average is close to 21. If it is, then once again you have used science and math to make a prediction that is accurate when you actually test it. Okay. I am going to give you one disclaimer though, that is very, 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 very important. Do not, I repeat, do not mess around with your experiment to try to get 21. Okay, if you do that, you're going to mess up. Okay, do 30 wines, turn it on, pick up as many washers as you can, but make sure that you are not adjusting your numbers to try to make it match your prediction. Okay, if you don't get your prediction, that's fine. But the reality is, once you take the classroom average, you're going to find the average is very close to the real answer. Okay, now 21 is not an answer. This is just an example data. Okay, you're going to use the data that you collect from the class and see what you come up with. Okay, once you are finished, you should be able to answer the question that we started with, which was, how does the number of wines around the core affect the strength of an electromagnet? So, collect all this data, go ahead and do your experiment for 30 and see if it matches, then come back and do your analysis and conclusions and make sure that you can answer the question of how the number of wines around the core affects the strength of magnetism. Once you have accomplished this, you are done with this investigation, and you are ready now to take the concept of electromagnets and apply it to reinventing an invention that was made in the 1800s that made a huge difference for the North winning the Civil War. And we'll talk about that tomorrow when we get to our next part of science. Until then, thank you and enjoy.